until about 2 o'clock. So going over, this is the exact same process that we've always gone over. So nothing is really changing for this. So the only real difference is that it's going to be far less obvious. Now, the reason that we have this upside down is because, again, we always tend to try to abbreviate everything. It's called visual abbreviation. Basically, there's a lot of information out there that we process visually that takes a lot of processing power. And it would be far too much information for our brain to try to remember all of it. The only people who can do that are people who have eidetic memories. It's also known as photographic memories. So typically our brain is going to abbreviate everything. So we can do a little test for this. Go ahead and just turn to the back side of one of your pieces of paper. And I'm going to give you a minute, just a minute, and I want you to draw an eye. Draw me an eye. Like an eyeball. Draw me an eye. You don't have to draw the head or a face, just draw me an eye. The best eye you can. Okay, so now that you finished drawing the eye, and you've had a chance to see what everyone else has done, what do we have? Would we say that any of these eyes are of a photographic quality? Would we say that any of them look particularly realistic? Probably not, because for the vast majority of you, you have not spent hours and hours and hours memorizing and committing to memory every single facet of the geometry of an eye. And so it's fun to watch. So we get some people, we get an eye, and that's about all we get. We get a teeny tiny pupil, we get a little iris, and we get the eyeball itself. Then for others, we get the optometrist eye. We get this kind of generic almond shape, a circle, and then a dot. For others, they've spent a little bit more time studying how the eye works, so we kind of get a little bit more of those planes. Then usually a big pupil, and then we get lots of little eyelashes that go in there, and on it goes. But now compare that to, say, she's got big, beautiful eyes. Something like this. A little bit different, right? Now I'll tell you what, when the artist made this, guess what? They weren't trying to pull all that stuff from memory, okay? They were looking at a source that provided them with that visual information. And the fact is that we can do that time and time and time again, but without copious amounts of study to commit that to memory, we're always going to try to instinctually want to abbreviate everything. To really be able to draw an eye, there are specific planes. You have to draw the shelf of the eyelid. You have to draw the upper eyelid. There's a little fold of skin there that rises up. Draw the iris. The bottom of the iris usually sits on top of the shelf of the bottom eyelid, with the rest of the iris ascending up underneath the top of the eyelid. Then our pupil will take up about 50% of the space inside. We'll have a little bit of our vein work and everything that will come up here in that tear duct region. The eye is round, so we tend to get some shading along the bottom. The top of the eyelid also casts a shadow across the top. Of course, our pupil will be dark. Our iris will also be a little dark. It'll tend to be a little lighter towards the bottom. We do tend to have a darker ring on the outside. The whole structure is rounded, so we'll have some shading on the left and right. It'll get a little lighter towards the center. Then we need some striations. In there. And my eraser's not going to do a good job, but technically then, we need a little highlight. And the highlight will sit on the opposite side of where we see the lights on the iris. And that's because the cornea is convex and the iris is concave. So, see the difference? And the only difference is that I've spent more time studying and memorizing the different components, okay? That helps me stop from making assumptions and relying on that abbreviated knowledge. I've kind of overridden that knowledge. So that is why it's called the upside down face. That is why we work with it in this orientation. But ultimately the function is just the same. You've divided it into halves, quarters, and thirds. We have our box that goes around our subject that is perfectly in proportion with our box over here. So then it's just a matter of finding a point. Just finding a point in space. We know to find a point in space, we need to find it on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis, just like latitude and longitude. It's how we find any kind of coordinate. The difference from the first project is you'll be able to see that it's not obvious where we should go. What you did a lot in the last project is you tried to grab an unknown distance, tip of the pencil, tip of the thumb, then compare that into some of these known measurements, these things that you've already figured out. And that's a perfectly valid way to work. The other thing you may want to try to do is start with your known and put them into your unknown, okay? In this case, I could take something like, grab a quarter of my height here, bring it here to the edge, and just ask myself, what does it touch? I can basically follow that line down. Well, there's a nice little point right there. Kind of the lowest little part of his widow peak is exactly 1/4 over using the height here. So 1/4 of my height coming across the horizontal axis brings me straight to that widow's peak. So release my measurement, come over here, grab 1/4 of my vertical, come straight over, make a little point. Now, that's how far over this is, but I still need to figure out how far up. So, this is where we're gonna grab that unknown measurement. This will be the trickier one, and try to compare it and see what it might fit into. So 1, 2. That's actually not a bad one right there, just right off the bat. So if I go and take the vertical height from the top to the widow's peak, and I start checking it against the total height here, 1 times, 2 times, goes directly in between this third and this quarter, 2 times. That's pretty simple. So let's come over here. Here's that same quarter, and there's that same third. Make a little temporary mark. Find that halfway point. You could check it, make sure you did a good job. Now, all I need to do is divide this place into 2 pieces, because we said it went in there twice. So let's just test it. Maybe this. Make a little mark for ourselves. Right there. Okay, so there's my half. Go straight back. I already know how far over, so I just go back and align it with how far over. Make a new little mark. So I'm elevating that dot up just a little bit. Get rid of the old one, and boom. A lot of times what I like to do is come over here and also put a little circle down, so I know I got that point. That's a point I've got, okay? You don't have to make it super big, but add a little point there. You'll kind of see the graphite. So this point is now that point, and I've already got my first one. And that's the whole process. You just do this over and over again. Now, the question that comes into this is, because these aren't all boxes now, is we've got these squiggles, right? Just a bunch of squiggles. So exactly what do I need? Do I need a point here and a point here and a point here and a point here, here, just to figure out that little squiggle? No. Because remember, we talked about how you're really good at figuring out small spaces. You're good at small spaces. Your eye is good at guessing and just kind of sketching or freehanding those in. We just don't want to make big jumps. So when we have these little lines, say from here to here, the next point I would find is right here at the top of that line. And if I could figure out where that is, I would feel fairly confident that I would be able to draw in that little line, that little shape, and just kind of look back and forth, and try to make it match, okay? Now you come down to some places like this. You've got this big old shape. I'd probably want to find this point over here, this point over here, it'd be down here. It's a much bigger shape, so we're going to want to find a couple more points, okay? Now there's some points that are going to be easy to find because we remember we've already solved half the problem. So look at all of the points that are touching the edges. We've got 1, 2, 3 right here. We already know how far over they are. They're all the way, which means they're going to be all the way over on this side. So for finding these points, we only need to figure out how far up they are. Just need to figure out how far up, okay? The more points you have, the more things you have to compare, the faster you're going to go. So let's go ahead and find another point here. Let's go ahead and find the top one so we can kind of finish this line. So I'm going to figure out where this is. I need to figure out how far over. I've always looked to the short side. How far over, and then how far down. So let's do how far over. Grab that, see if that goes into anything nice and neat. My, that's convenient. Goes over about 1/4, a perfect quarter. Goes over a quarter. Grab my quarter. Come straight over. Make a mark. Now, what I need to know here is how far down. How far down. So, 1, 2, 3. Looks like 3 almost goes into that halfway point. Looks like it's over that one. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see if that works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would say if we go from to the halfway point and divide that into 5 pieces, 5 pieces, we'll have what we need. Come over here, find that same half, divide it into 5 pieces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just a touch short. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a little longer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I've got that. Go back to my points. I know how far over it is, so I'm just matching how far over, finding where it needs to be elevated to, deleting the old line, and now I've got the top point and the bottom point. So you can rotate these to whatever's ergonomic. So once I see that, I can then just go and very carefully draw that shape in. Now, unlike the last one, where we were drawing just kind of empty spaces, we were only drawing like the perimeters, we didn't necessarily need to fill it in. For this, I find it sometimes a lot easier just to go ahead and fill it in as I go. It's just kind of easier to see that way. However, I do like to make sure that the tops and bottoms are nice and crisp, okay? I don't mind seeing dots as you go. The more dots I see, nice, solid, hard dots, the more I know you're measuring, which makes me very happy. So there you go. I got that squiggle here, I got that squiggle here. This one looks a lot longer, but that's because this whole picture is bigger. This is a little bit shorter, but our picture is shorter. And I tried to match that curve really well. And now I'm done. Now, when I go, if I want to trust and use this now as a measuring tool, if I want to use this as a measuring tool, I'm going to remember I'm only going to measure to the top and bottom of this line, because that's the part I can really trust, because that's the part I measured. Does that make sense? It's literally no different than what we did before. No different. You just got to hunt a little bit more. Just going to have to work a little bit harder to find stuff. But again, when we started out, I started with a known and asked myself what unknowns this fit into. I could follow that same thing, kind of follow the plumb line down. So that distance, that 1/4 distance, is also the same as the edge of this line. So maybe this is the next point that I try to get, right here. Well, I already know. I just start with my quarter, bring my quarter over. That tells me how far over. Then I just need to figure out how far up. Grab the shorter of the two distances, and then start comparing it. See, does it fit into anything nice and neat? Nothing off the bat. 1, 2. 1, 2. 2. Looks like it's just past that quarter. So basically 3/4 of my total height here. It's just a smidge past. So I could come over here, go just a smidge past. One, 2. So just a smidge past. I need something that goes in there 2 times. 1, 2. Be just about there. 1, 2. About right there. Then again, I know how far over. Just need to figure out how far down. So come the right distance over. Then we elevate that dot. You always double check, make sure I got the correct distance over, which I did. That's our new dot. So this dot here is this dot right here. Then I could start plotting this, I could start plotting this, I could start plotting where the rest of the stuff is, and then finish up that shape. The process is exactly the same. Exactly the same. The more drawing you have, the faster it's going to go. Okay? The last little thing that I should mention here is about pacing yourself. Okay? Pacing yourself. I don't know what your schedule is like, okay? You'll have to see what your schedule has, okay? We've already talked about how drawing takes a long time. There's literally nothing I could do to avoid that. It's the same with like learning music. It's inherent to the discipline. So you have to ask yourself how much time that you have and make yourself little progress goals, okay? So if you're gonna have 4 hours to work on this over the course of the whole weekend, know after the first hour, you need to have about 25% of it drawn. 2 hours, you need to be halfway done, etc. Give yourself like little milestones. The other thing is that the less time you have, the more guesswork you're going to have to do. So as you're drawing these shapes, so you have this shape here, if you don't have a ton of time left, you may only be able to find maybe the top here, the left, and the bottom, and you're gonna have to extrapolate out the rest of it. It's far less likely that you're going to be accurate, but at least you'll have done some measuring. You'll have done some. So the less time, the more guesswork, and that's just natural. Eventually, hopefully you can take my life drawing class one day, and I'll give you 45 minutes to draw a whole face from life. Trust me, there's a lot of guesswork that you have to do. Now, fortunately, that is informed by a lot of anatomical study from the first half of the semester. So the more time you can devote, the more measuring you'll be able to do, the more accurate you'll end up being. Okay? Excellent. All right, I'll be here if you have any questions.